That really would have been a letdown, sure, but of course. It wouldn't be the first because during my extensive experience with Pokemon, I've had many disappointments throughout all generations. Every Pokemon trainer lives with a certain amount of deception, and that's our theme for today. My biggest disappointment, letdown, or heartbreak in each generation. Be it rumors that I believed and that ended up not being true, castles in the air that I personally built, or hopes about certain characters or aspects of the game that didn't materialize. Starting with... If we follow the release order of the games, Yellow is the only version of the 3 originals that I had as a kid in its original cartridge. Playing it for the first time after the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th gens, because I found out that you could have the 3 starters in the same cartridge, and that was one of my dreams. So I started my journey in a more retro Kanto, but that I knew well as my leaf green cartridge was already begging for mercy by then. Although, I haven't told you the entire truth. Yellow was not the only first-gen game I played. Well, back then, the internet was a much more peaceful and romantic place than it is nowadays. When it came to Pokemon, there was not even 1% of the actual content, and there was mostly a plethora of primitive pages about cheats, rumors, and info of dubious reliability. But it was really fascinating, and of course, I used to read a lot of them. One of the most popular topics there was the Lost Green version, buried in mystery since it never left Japan. And wonderful claims were made about it, such as a secret battle with Professor Oak after beating the game, Catch Mew in its original event, and one that I remember was especially interesting to me, encountering Pokemon that evolved by trading in the wild. By now you shall know the trauma I had with that. It's funny how having already much fresher and more complete games than that, the promise of secrets that never reached us was left hanging in my mind. Until one day I got my hands on a flashcard that could emulate Game Boy games, and a ROM I found promised to be that original green version translated. I was finally going to fulfill that dream, get back to those lost events, settle those old scores. And I don't know if that ROM I played was the original green version or not, but all the mysticism around it was always just hype. There were no extra events that would be removed, no different wild Pokemon, and none of the wonders that the early internet promised. Just slightly uglier sprites and quite a few more bugs, which were both the real reasons why the revised Red and Blue versions were released in the West. And because they thought Blastoise was going to be more successful than Venusaur, I guess. Now we know the truth, but it was no doubt disappointing to realize it at the time. But now let's go even further back in time. Pokemon Silver was my first game of the series, and speaking of disappointments, that's a double-edged sword. For one thing, it was my first contact, so I had no expectations. As a result, I was not disappointed by many things that would have surely made me feel down if I had played its predecessors. For example, seeing how Kanto is available after beating the League, only to find that you cannot enter the unknown dungeon to get Mewtwo or find the legendary birds anywhere, would have been a tough pill to swallow if I had played and done all those things in the originals. But since I had never been in that region before and it was all new to me, it felt like a full and well-rounded experience. Now, on the other side of the coin, not knowing anything and going blindly and being surprised in every corner can lead to many disappointments. Like what happened to me with Lapras. If you haven't heard it before, let me refresh your memory. This mystical Pokemon caught my eye from the very first moment with its beautiful design, power, and kind personality. But while I was playing my only game, Pokemon Silver, I already had friends with their Game Boy Advance and Leaf Green who, for obvious reasons, easily got it and told me that it was a very easy Pokemon to catch. But in my native Johto, it didn't seem to be anywhere to be found. I explored every single corner of the cartridge, but no trace of the transport Pokemon, which naturally led me to be obsessed with it, and that made me an easy target for pranks. For example, one time a kid told me it was Magikarp's last evolution, probably based on the fact that it's right after it in the Pokedex, and I had a red one. I felt so special, poor little me. I was excited about the idea of a red Lapras as a possible evolution, so I put a lot of effort into leveling it up to evolve it. Imagine how traumatic it was for me to watch my hopes fade more and more with each experience point. Eventually, I found that Lapras does drop by Johto on Friday afternoons in the depths of the Union Cave, and it's a nice encounter. It feels really special, and I have a lot of memories of walking home from class to hang out with it. But I've always thought it wouldn't have hurt to get a hint from some NPC or something to make you realize that in such a remote place that most would overlook and only at a certain day of the week, something so unique is going to happen. I finally joined the advanced era, first with Sapphire and later with Emerald, but the playground rumors, far from disappearing, were at their peak. At least we had these little ones on our side in my country, a relic of the past that made every Pokemon fan of that time delight. But it was precisely in these magazines that we found out about something unbelievable. For the first time ever in the Emerald version, you could somehow catch Mew on its own island, a remote place that could only be accessed with a mythical object known as the Old Sea Map that nobody knows where or how to get. And in this nest of rumors, the Battle Frontier appeared. Don't say it wasn't easy to connect the dots. A secret Pokemon on a lost island that no one can reach, and simultaneously the greatest battle challenge, crushing anyone who tries it, so none of us knew what the hell happened when it was beaten. Of course, led by a legendary explorer who represents bravery. How could we not have thought that Brandon, after collecting the 7 symbols, was going to give us the Old Sea Map so that we could embark on the ultimate adventure? One so amazing that even him didn't have enough bravery to face. Anyway, as a kid, I never got close to beating the Battle Frontier. I think the best I did was getting almost all the silver symbols and a couple of the gold ones. Still, if I hadn't found out that what we all believed was a lie, that the real prize was a joke, I would have never given up and I would have finished it somehow, even if I needed a miracle for it. Life has many twists and turns, and who would have thought that I was going to take out that thorn so many years later? But the stars never cease to remind me of this bitter pill. Back to Kanto. Although this was actually my first time there, if we don't count the post-game journey in Pokemon Silver, of course. But that nostalgic tour would only increase even more my interest in going on a real adventure in Kanto, with Leaf Green being my second game. There were breathtaking, mysterious, epic, and even sad moments, because there are few times in the whole series, even today, that leave me as empty and melancholic as seeing the SS Anne set sail. As a kid, I was convinced that at some point it was going to come back for the next trip, and who can judge me? Even the sailors point out that the cruise liner will be back next year, and that added to coming from the second gen, in which we can go to the Kanto of 3 years later, made me hope that the opposite would happen, and when the game hours reached 365 days, I could embark and see the Johto of a few years ago. I still feel a certain bitterness when I see a ship leave in a game, because no matter how absurd and far-fetched my hopes were, I keep asking myself, was it so hard not to say anything about it coming back? You see, the story is still about maps, ships, and second regions to be visited. As you may already know, one of the beta items present in the game code, but inaccessible, is precisely the SS ticket, whose description says that it's required for sailing on the ferry, something that was not possible at first in those games, but at that time, I was still obsessed with the idea of going to other regions, and to make matters worse, some Pokemon from the GTS had Johto as their Met location. This actually happened because they already had the future remakes in mind, and programmed that localization for the Pokemon that would come from those in the future, being the ones I saw in the GTS most likely hacked. But the tragedy was inevitable, because once I got the ticket, by methods worthy of the Grand Line, I began to talk to all the sailors in the game, hoping that maybe one of them would want to set sail and fulfill my dream. However, that obviously never happened. I'm starting to think that my overwhelming urge to return to Kanto somehow sent them energy to make such excellent remakes, just the opposite of disappointing. And I don't remember any particular letdown in them, so let's go straight to the 5th gen. One of the most unique places in the vast Unova is without a doubt the Black City, a wealthy and menacing metropolis in ongoing development with a dreamlike and futuristic feel in it, a nest of corruption, greed, and desolation. The city was there, always present on the map but still out of reach, as if it was a warning that something fateful was going to happen as soon as I set foot in it. I defeated N in the decisive battle for Unova, traveled through the eastern part of the region, and finally walked into the Black Metropolis, being completely absorbed by its heavy ambiance. Something awesome was about to happen in that place. It was fate, the last event of the game, with the name of the version that had been promising so much from the first moment. Well, I was wrong. Black City? More like Smoke City. I'm aware that it's quite weird of me to have expectations of something like a city, and that once again the disappointment I had with this place was due to fantasies in my head more than anything else, but what can I say? Black City also has an interesting but totally wasted mechanic. New NPCs can move in through the Unova Link, and they can leave or stay depending on the player's actions. But in the end, that was all just another one of those horrible schemes in games to get you hooked on playing every day and make you feel bad when you don't, especially for weirdos like me who empathize with NPCs. These characters simply challenge you to a bunch of uninteresting and pointless battles without any in-game purpose. The only really interesting thing about the place are the items that can be bought in the market, but nothing compared to the ultimate game revelation that its location, name, and aesthetics promised. Even the White Forest of the other version, without anything special and being aesthetically 1,000 times inferior, is somewhat more useful in terms of gameplay, as you can at least catch some interesting Pokemon there that don't appear anywhere else. Once again, it seems that they heard me because in Black and White 2, they introduced to the city the beautiful Black Tower. Still far from challenges like the Battle Frontier, but with a cool atmosphere, it's very enjoyable and quite challenging. And above all, it has a great final battle that is really worth it, with also something that the Frontier cannot say. One of the best rewards, if not the best, for winning a battle of the whole series. But that doesn't mean that these games didn't have their share of letdowns. One of the few things that annoyed me about these games was and still is the very definition of disappointment. The challenge mode. Yeah, one of the features that people keep demanding to this day. How can something like that be underwhelming? Well, from the moment I found out it was going to be real, I was really excited. Finally, a challenge that was going to put me on the ropes at a time when I already knew a little bit of how everything worked and I was starting to need something like this. But the implementation would be far from good. Besides the fact that you can't unlock it until you beat the champion for the first time, which takes a lot of what the experience was about, and I think you should be able to choose the option from the beginning, the approach itself is far away from what I expected. They could have tried so many things, like trying to play with variations that the series had already explored, such as the level limitation of the Battle Frontier, or new formulas, such as the disobedience of Pokemon that are too powerful even if they are not from trades, one of the things that I most liked about Legends Arceus, or just things that ultimately puts the player in a real equal position compared to their opponents, forcing them to play wisely and strategically. Instead, they limited it to very minor level adjustments and at most changing some of the Pokemon in certain teams and improving a few movesets. Actually, even that approach was not used to its full extent, since if they weren't going to innovate, they could have at least given leaders and rival teams that worked competitively in later stages, but that wasn't the case either. The outcome was a pretty challenging experience by the standards of the series, effectively above the average. But for me, it's still far from the hard mode I would really love to see, one that really gives trouble to someone who knows what they're doing. But my biggest disappointment of the 3D era would come from another angle. War, misery, death, destruction. A crumbling world from which, in the middle of such devastation, a small flower would be reborn. But at what cost? Better to take it in a poetic way, right? Because the game itself doesn't give us much more. The story that at a certain point X and Y build around AZ is incredible, and truly one of the best of the series, so to see to what extent everything that has to do with him ends up being wasted, contributing nothing to the plot and having one of the most forced and anticlimactic resolutions I've ever seen, was undoubtedly my biggest disappointment of this generation. Unless we consider... How about going a little bit faster? Everything is much more obvious and mundane from this point on, something like a merry-go-round of letdowns. Not having the Battle Frontier in the Hoenn remakes was a total calamity, even more so when faced with the obvious step back in the game's difficulty. It could have at least left a good taste in the mouth that way. With Sun and Moon, the games thrilled me with their story and the island challenge, but from the very first moment, their trials were awful, at least for me. The battles with the totem Pokemon were a true delight, but as for the flow of the trials as such, almost none of them had anything interesting or fun to offer. Knowing that there would be island trials instead of gyms, I was definitely expecting something a lot more exciting than moving around a map battling wild Pokemon. Gosh, even Galar's gyms are much better island trials than the real island trials. I guess that speaks for itself. My disappointment in Let's Go is easily the most obvious choice in the entire video. The Sevi Islands are both my favorite post-game and location in the series. I was expecting a genuine and authentic journey through islands full of nostalgia, but it didn't happen. Visiting them once again would have been a good excuse to grab some games whose concept wasn't appealing to me and make me get excited about them. But they decided to remove them mercilessly and for no apparent reason. How dare you? Initially, the story of Sword and Shield was like a huge bucket of cold water for me, a far sportier approach to battles and gyms with a population that worships its most outstanding celebrities and a president who, in the shadows, accumulates a dangerous amount of power. From the characters we were shown and the hints we saw in the trailers, I was sure that they were going to make the most of this topic to present a completely corrupt Pokemon League, an idea that was fascinating to me for questioning such sacred and idealized principles in the series. In the end, it had nothing to do with that, and at the time, it was a big disappointment. But as you know, over time, I have rather changed my mind about this games. Although the plot is handled in a rather questionable way during most of the game, and it was not what I expected, I ended up enjoying and liking a lot the story of heroes who, when the time comes, do their best not to let down those who have faith in them. But that doesn't mean it wasn't a downer for me at the time, so it's the one chosen from the video. We are now at Legends Arceus, a breath of fresh air with quite a few complaints. For example, the way Arceus itself has been portrayed, which has resulted in a game that promised to reveal more about it barely having any of its presence, but oh well. It seems they decided to keep it as a mysterious figure for now, so who knows if it's not over yet. But call me crazy, I was hoping for at least some certainty on a game with its name. And finally, Scarlet and Violet, an adventure that has made me connect with the series as I used to and has been a very nice surprise in many ways, but not in others. Aside from all the technical problems, for which I was quite lucky as they didn't affect me too much, the real experience in the Paldea region was a bit of a cold shower. Being from Spain, you can imagine how exciting it was for me to explore its equivalent in the Pokemon world, or how the artistic, cultural, and historical elements I grew up with would translate into the games I love so much. Sadly, apart from the Pokédex that does make an excellent use of this inspiration and sources, and the occasional sparkle on the map, we find ourselves with a bland and empty region, with interesting cities that never go in depth and give the impression of being scale models rather than a living world. The open world itself was for me quite enjoyable to wander through, but devastating and very detrimental to the whole feel of the region. Had it followed a more traditional approach, it could have potentially been an amazing place taking full advantage of the incredible cultural heritage, vibrant urban life, and stunning landscapes they had on their hands. But for now, those are my stories of disappointments in each game in the series. No one knows what lies ahead. However, I hope we can continue to enjoy these adventures together. Be nice, and I'll see you soon.